Hi, this is Steve Mouzon joining you this morning from snowy Montreal and wishing I was in the Bahamas. One of the reasons I love Bahamian architecture so much, and actually all around what I call the Caribbean Rim, um, is the fact that it actually reflects the nature of its regional conditions better than almost any architecture that I know in the world in this regard, that so much of it is not actually about fashion or style, but is precisely a response to being in a place where there's frequent hurricanes. And for example, the shape of the roof, you typically for a medium-sized building, the roofs will be hipped um, because of course each plane of the roof supports every other plane. You'll find that the slopes are normally between 8 and 12 and 9 and 12, unless the upstairs is occupied with dormers, in which case the slope can be steeper, maybe even up to 12 and 12. Um, and what the hurricane experts tell us now is that these are the slopes, kind of the sweet spot of slopes, where it is too steep to easily fail an uplift, but not so steep that it fails an overturning. So but now way before there were hurricane experts, the old folks, if they were lucky enough to survive a hurricane but their house was not, when they crawled out of the wreckage of that house and looked at their neighbor's house across the street that was still standing, they said, "I'm going to rebuild like that." And so what it amounted to was actually a set of construction practices and design practices of things that were proven to work. Another thing to think of, we were involved with actually when I wrote the book, A Living Tradition, Architecture of the Bahamas. It was because it was commissioned by a number of Bahamians, including the developer Oriental Lindroth, who was the town founder of Schooner Bay. And when Hurricane Irene crossed Schooner Bay at her strongest point of winds of 125 miles an hour and higher, I believe, if I remember correctly, uh, they didn't have special Miami-Dade hurricane windows. Their windows were actually quite ordinary, but they did not lose one pane of glass because they did what Bahamians have done for centuries, and that is they simply shut the shutters. And of course, you'll notice in the Bahamas, the shutters tend to be solid board shutters, so the shutters took the beating and preserved the glass. There's a number of other patterns like this. For example, you notice a lot of buildings that are masonry buildings that have a base that might be 3 to 5 to even 6 feet high in some cases, that is a different color of stucco from the upper part of the wall. That's not just a decorative or stylistic thing. What it lets you do is, because the lower part of the wall always takes a heavy beating from not only hurricanes, but just simply normal wear and tear, kids out playing ball and they kick the ball up against the wall or whatever, then you're able to actually refinish that part of the wall more frequently, and you don't have to touch the rest of the wall. So it kind of helps to conserve on resources. And then you'll also notice in a lot of cases that the piers that are underneath a porch column or veranda column, excuse me, those can be actually very heavy. The reason they are heavier is because that if you're in a place that experiences storm surge, then of course there's a lot of waterborne debris that would be slamming up against a pier. And if it's a light pier, like you might have somewhere inland in the U.S., then it can just simply crush the pier and the entire veranda would collapse. Whereas with the heavy pier, then that's a different story. And sometimes going back to the roofs for a second. For sometimes you will have gable roofs. It's either like a sawtooth gable on a very small building, where the roof is so small that when the gable stands up to meet the force of the wind, there's just not that much surface area. Or you'll see in civic buildings, large, heavy masonry civic buildings in Nassau, for example, you'll see structures there that are gabled as well, but they're so heavy that they can take the beating from a hurricane force wind. So anyhow, those are just a few of the things that are really fun to look at. And because always ask yourself, why did they do that? Don't just say it's a Bahamian style. Or it was the fashion of the day or whatever. There actually normally are some really important reasons why that happened, and it wasn't just about style or fashion.